For 34 years, one state in India was governed continuously by a communist party. 34 years. That is the longest uninterrupted run of democratically elected left governance anywhere in the world. Not Cuba, not China, not the Soviet Union. None of them got there through the ballot box. West Bengal did. The party that achieved this was the Communist Party of India, Marxist, the CPIM, and understanding it means understanding not just ideology, but history, strategy, land, language, violence, and ultimately the reasons a political force that seemed invincible simply collapsed. Today, we are going to trace the full arc. Where did the CPIM come from? What does it actually believe? How did it build the most formidable political machine in post-independence India, and why did it fall? Let's go back to the very beginnings. To understand the CPIM, you have to understand the Communist Party of India, the CPI, which came first. And to understand the CPI, you have to understand what communism meant in colonial India. The CPI was founded in the early 1920s. The exact date is contested, but the most commonly cited founding is 1925 in Kanpur. Its intellectual godfather was M.N. Roy, a Bengali revolutionary who had been in contact with Lenin himself at the Second Congress of the Communist International in 1920. From the beginning, Indian communism had a tension baked into it, the tension between the Comintern's instruction from Moscow and the realities of an anti-colonial struggle here in India. Moscow's line kept changing, and at times communists were told to work with the Congress. At other times, they were told that Congress was a bourgeoisie organization serving British interests. This produced a series of catastrophic miscalculation, the most damaging being during the Second World War. The CPI, following Moscow's line after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, declared the war a people's war and actively supported the British war effort. This put them on the opposite side from the Congress and most of the independence movement. While Gandhi and Nehru were in prison for the Quit India movement, the CPI was cooperating with the colonial government. It was a stain that the Indian left never really washed off. After independence, the CPI tried several things at once. It participated in elections, it supported armed insurrections, it shifted positions on Pakistan, on Kashmir, on land reforms. Its credibility suffered accordingly. Then came the event that would split it permanently. When China attacked India in 1962, the CPI fractured along a fundamental fault line. One faction aligned with Moscow, which backed India, condemned China's aggression. Another faction aligned with Beijing either refused to condemn it or actively justified it. The pro-Beijing faction within the CPI was concentrated heavily in West Bengal, Kerala, and Andhra Pradesh, the party's strongest states, and they had the numbers. After years of internal warfare, the split became formal. On November 7, 1964, deliberately chosen to coincide with the anniversary of Russian Revolution, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, was founded at a congress in Calcutta. The date tells you something. The founders wanted to signal continuity with revolutionary Marxism, not Khrushchev's Soviet accommodation. The founding figures included E.M.S. Namboodiripad from Kerala, Jyoti Basu from West Bengal, P. Sundaraiah from Andhra Pradesh, and B.T. Ranadev, the firebrand who had led an earlier failed armed insurrection in 1948. So what did the CPIM believe? Let's be precise about this. The CPIM declared itself Marxist-Leninist. It rejected the Soviet line of peaceful coexistence with capitalism. It believed capitalism had to be overthrown, not negotiated with. But it also, crucially, rejected the Maoist line of immediate armed revolution through peasant guerrilla warfare. The CPIM staked out a third position: parliamentary struggle combined with mass mobilization. Use elections, build trade unions, organize peasants, create a mass base, and when the conditions are right, move forward a revolutionary transformation of the complete society. In practice, this meant the CPIM was never fully committed to either parliamentary democracy or armed revolution. It was always somewhat in between, which gave it flexibility but also made it vulnerable to challenges from both the sides. The challenge from the left would come almost immediately. In 1967, something happened in a small village in Darjeeling district that would permanently reshape Indian left politics. In Naxalite, a group of communist cadres led by Charu Majumdar and Kanu Sanyal organized poor peasants to seize land from landlords by force. It was not a spontaneous uprising, it was a deliberate, ideologically driven act of rebellion. Armed peasants began redistributing land, a police officer was killed, a woman activist was killed. The rebellion spread. At the time, the CPIM was actually part of the government in West Bengal in a coalition called the United Front. So it was a CPIM supported government that sent police to crush a rebellion led by CPIM cadres. The Naxalite uprising split the Indian left again. Mao praised it, called it a peal of spring thunder. Charu Majumdar declared that the parliamentary road was a lie, that only armed agrarian revolution could liberate Indian peasants. He articulated what became known as the annihilation line. Individual landlords and class enemies should be physically eliminated. In 1969, the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, the CPIML, was founded. It rejected elections entirely. Its cadres went underground, and for the next several years, West Bengal, particularly Calcutta, became the site of extraordinary political violence. Young students, intellectuals, teachers, radicalized by Majumdar's writings, carried out targeted killings of landlords, policemen, Congress workers. The state responded with a brutal counterinsurgency. Thousands of Naxalite cadres were killed, many in fake encounters, many in police custody. By the early 1970s, the Naxalite movement had been militarily crushed in West Bengal. Majumdar died in police custody in 1972. The movement fragmented into dozens of splinter groups. But the Naxalite rupture had lasting consequences for the CPIM. It forced the party to make a clear choice: commit to parliamentary politics or lose everything to the Naxalites on one side and the Congress on the other. The CPIM chose parliament, and it chose West Bengal as the place to prove that the parliamentary road could very well work. To understand how the CPIM came to dominate West Bengal, you need to understand the specific conditions of Bengal in the 1950s, 60s and the 70s. West Bengal had the largest concentration of industrial workers in India: jute mills, engineering factories, dock workers in Calcutta. It had a large, educated, politically conscious middle class, the Bhadralok, with a long tradition of radical politics going back to the Bengal Renaissance and the revolutionary nationalism of the earlier 20th century. And it had an acute agrarian crisis. Land was concentrated in the hands of a small number of landlords called as Jyotidars, while millions of sharecroppers called Bargadars worked the land under exploitative arrangements. The Bargadar typically had to give half or more of his crop to the landlord. He could be evicted at will. He had no legal protection. The Congress had governed West Bengal since independence, but it had done nothing meaningful about land reforms. It was too dependent on landlord support, and it was increasingly associated with corruption, political violence through its own armed cadres, and a brutal governance style that alienated both workers and the educated middle class. The CPIM saw its opening, and it took it, methodically, patiently, over 2 decades. The first pillar was trade union organization. The CPIM built CITU, the Center of Indian Trade Unions, into the most powerful labor federations in West Bengal. Factory by factory, mill by mill, they organized workers. Strikes became political instruments. The relationship between the party and the worker was not just economic, it was cultural, social, almost familial. The second pillar was student and youth mobilization. The Students' Federation of India and the Democratic Youth Federation of India gave the CPIM a pipeline of cadres. Every college campus in Bengal had a CPIM student unit. These were not debating clubs, they were political schools that trained the next generation of party workers. The third pillar, and this is the one that proved decisive, was peasant organization. The Kisan Sabha, the Peasant Front, began organizing Bargadars across rural Bengal. They held Jyotidars accountable. They publicized evictions, they built solidarity networks, and they told the Bargadars something that no one had told them before. You have rights, the land you till, you have a claim on it. In 1967, the CPIM supported United Front government came to power in West Bengal for the first time. It lasted only briefly. The centre dismissed it under President's rule. A second United Front government in 1969 was also dismissed, but in these short windows, the party got a glimpse of what state power could do, and the Bargadars got a glimpse of what protection felt like. Then came 1977, and the Left Front took power, and this time it would not let go. The Left Front was a coalition of left parties led by the CPIM with Jyoti Basu as the chief minister. It won on the back of anti-emergency sentiment. Indira Gandhi had suspended democracy and the left had resisted. But more than that, it won because it had spent 20 years building an organization that could mobilize voters at the village level like no other party in India. The first thing the left front did when it came to power was launch what became its most celebrated achievement, Operation Barga. Operation Barga was a land reform program, but it did something cleverly different from other Indian land reforms, most of which failed because landlords hid their land and used legal loopholes. Instead of redistributing land outright, which was politically explosive and legally complicated, Operation Barga registered the Bargadars. It gave the sharecropper a legal document, a record of rights. This record meant the landlord could no longer evict him arbitrarily. It meant he was entitled to a legally mandated share of the crop, 75%, not 50%, and it meant he had recourse to the law. By the mid-1980s, over 1.5 million Bargadars had been registered. Agricultural productivity in West Bengal rose significantly. Studies including by the World Bank credited Operation Barga with measurable reductions in rural poverty. This was real, tangible, material improvements in people's lives, and the CPIM made sure everyone knew who had delivered it. The second major reform was the Panchayati Raj revamp. The left front decentralized governance to the village level to the Gram Panchayat in a way that no state in India had done before. On paper, this was democratic decentralization. In practice, it was also something else. The CPIM captured the panchayats in 1978, 1983, 1988, in election after election, and used them as the local nerve centers of party control. The party and the state became, at the village level, almost indistinguishable. The local panchayat decided who got a ration card, who got a house under a government scheme, who got a loan, who got a job on a government project. And in most villages, the person who ran the panchayat was the CPIM, local secretary. This was not democracy in the textbook sense. It was a form of party governance, where access to the state depended on your relationship with the party. Supporters called it responsive, accountable, local governance that actually reached the poor. Critics called it a patronage machine, a system in which opposition was punished and loyalty was rewarded. Both descriptions were accurate. Jyoti Basu governed West Bengal for 23 years, from 1977 to 2000. He was an unusual figure for a communist leader, urban, English educated at a London law college, fond of fine living, not given to ideological fervor. But he was a superb machine politician. He understood power, how to build it, how to hold it, and how to deny it to the opponents. Under Basu, the CPIM also built what was effectively a parallel civic society. Party committees at every level, district, subdivision, block, village, handled disputes, mediated conflicts, ran cultural programs. The party was present at every life event, births, weddings, deaths, you name it. If you lived in rural Bengal, the CPIM was not an abstraction. It was the organization that shaped your daily life. But the left front's dominance also had a dark side, one that grew darker as the decades passed. Political violence was endemic in West Bengal under the left front. The CPIM used its cadres, sometimes armed, to suppress opposition. Congress workers were attacked. Later, Trinamool Congress workers were also attacked. Opposition candidates were prevented from filing nominations. Booth capturing was systematic. The party justified this in familiar terms. The opposition was backed by reactionary class forces, by landlords, by communalists. Defense of the revolution required defense of its cadres. But what this language obscured was something simpler. The CPIM used violence to maintain power. The second contradiction was economic. By the 1990s, West Bengal, which had been among India's most industrialized states, was in serious decline. The jute mills were closing, the engineering factories were sick. Calcutta, once the premier city of British India, was falling behind Bombay, Delhi and Madras. Investment was not coming in, and the reasons were not hard to find. Labor militancy under CITU, infrastructure neglect, and a business climate in which the party's approval was required for any significant enterprise. The left front's response to deindustrialization was initially ideological: celebrate the workers' struggle, blame national economic policy, blame liberalization. But by the late 1990s, a new generation of CPIM leaders were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. If Bengal's economy was stagnating, who were they governing for? The landless peasant who had gained from Operation Barga was now growing up and looking for a factory job, a job that didn't exist. Buddhadev Bhattacharjee, who succeeded Jyoti Basu as chief minister in the year 2000, represented this new thinking. He was ideologically CPIM, but he understood that West Bengal needed industry, real industry, foreign direct investments, special economic zones. He began quoting investors, he spoke the language of development, he looked like a left government that had made its peace with economic reality. And then came Singur and Nandigram, and everything started to fall apart. In 2006, the West Bengal government announced that the Tata Group would build its revolutionary small car, the Nano, at Singur in Hooghly district. To do this, approximately 1,000 acres of agricultural land would be acquired. The land acquisition was done under a colonial-era law, the Land Acquisition Act of 1894, which allowed the state to acquire land compulsorily for public purpose. The Left Front used it to acquire land for a private company. Farmers who had benefited from Operation Barga, the very people the CPIM had built its base on, found their land being taken away. Some farmers accepted compensation, others refused and demanded their land back. A protest movement began, led initially by local farmers and then joined, amplified and politically weaponized by Mamata Banerjee and her Trinamool Congress. The CPIM was in an impossible position. It had built its entire political identity on protecting the peasant against the landlord, against the state, against capital. Now it was the state using coercive power to take land from peasants for a multinational corporation. The contradiction was not lost on anyone. Then came Nandigram. In early 2007, the government announced another CES, a chemical hub in Nandigram in East Midnapur district. The local population rose up in resistance. The area was effectively sealed off by the villagers who refused to let government officials in. On March 14, 2007, police and the CPIM cadres entered Nandigram. The official death toll was 14. Eyewitness accounts and subsequent investigation suggested the number was higher. Women reported sexual violence. The images and testimonies that emerged from Nandigram were devastating. The response from the CPIM leadership was catastrophic in political terms. Instead of acknowledging what had happened, senior leaders, including the chief minister, initially defended the action. Buddhadev Bhattacharjee made a statement that became infamous, that the people of Nandigram had been paid back in their own coin. Nandigram broke something, not just in West Bengal's politics, but in the emotional contract between the left and its own supporters. Intellectuals who had spent their careers supporting the left, writers, filmmakers, academics, began to withdraw. Aparna Sen wrote an open letter. Mahashrita Devi, perhaps Bengal's most respected living writer, spoke out. These were not bourgeoisie detractors, these were the left's own cultural constituency. The Trinamool Congress swept the 2008 panchayat elections in areas where the CPIM had been dominant. The momentum had shifted. In 2009, the Trinamool Congress swept West Bengal in the Lok Sabha elections. In 2011, after 34 years, the Left Front lost the state assembly election. Mamata Banerjee became the chief minister. The scale of the defeat was stunning. The CPIM went from 176 seats in 2006 to just 40 seats in 2011. In 2016, it won 26. In 2021, it won 0. 0 seats in a state it had governed for 34 years. In 2026, they won just 1 seat. The collapse of the CPIM in West Bengal is one of the most dramatic falls in democratic political history. And it wasn't one thing, it was several things compounding over time. First, the cadre became the machine. The same panchayat structure that had empowered the poor in 1978 had by 2005 become a patronage network that rewarded loyalty and punished dissent. The party no longer needed to deliver, it needed to control, and the cadre knew it. Second, the ideological compass broke. The CPIM could not reconcile being a communist party with inviting Tata to set up a factory. It couldn't explain to a Singur farmer why the same party that had given him land rights was now taking his land. It had no language for this contradiction because its language was built for a different world. Third, Mamata was a better opposition than the CPIM had ever faced. She was from Bengal, she spoke Bengali, she was emotionally present in a way that the increasingly bureaucratic CPIM leadership was not. She outmobilized them on their own terrain. Fourth, violence had become self-defeating. The same political violence that had protected the Left Front's dominance now radicalized its opponents and alienated its own sympathizers. When Nandigram happened, there was no narrative defense available. And underneath all this, a deeper truth. The CPIM had built its base on the agrarian poor. Operation Barga had genuinely helped them, but it had not built an economy that would absorb the next generation. The children of the Bargadars needed jobs in factories, in offices, in the services sector. The left front had not created those jobs, and the children voted differently from their parents. Where does the CPIM stand today? Nationally, it is a minor force. It has representation in Kerala. As of writing this, it has no representation in Kerala, where it actually continued to govern in periodic coalition and in a few other states. But as a national political actor, it is largely irrelevant. In West Bengal, the collapse had been near total. The CPIM has lost its panchayat networks, its trade union base, and much of its cadre, some of whom joined Trinamool Congress, and some the BJP. The saffronization of Bengal, the BJP's rise in districts that were once left fortresses, would not have been possible without the CPIM's collapse, creating a political vacuum. The irony is not small. A party that spent decades fighting Hindu communalism, that genuinely believed it was holding back the tide of the RSS, vacated the space in which the RSS could grow. The peasant of Bardhaman or Bakura, who had voted left for 30 years, did not suddenly become a secularist after 2011. He looked for a new patron, and in many cases, he found one in the BJP. The CPIM is attempting a revival. New general secretaries, new outreach, a renewed focus on Kerala as a model. But the structural conditions that allowed it to dominate Bengal, a large organized peasantry, a fractured Congress, a weak BJP, no longer exist. What does remain is the legacy. Operation Barga remains one of the most significant land reform programs in Indian history. The panchayat elections of 1978 set a model for decentralization that other states eventually followed. And the CPIM's mass organizations, the trade unions, the student federations, the Kisan Sabha, built a tradition of working class organization that still exists, even if it's diminished. The story of the CPIM in West Bengal is, in the end, the story of what happens when an ideology meets power and what power does to ideology over time. It came in promising liberation, it delivered for a while real material improvement for real people. And when it became what it had fought against, an entrenched, self-preserving establishment that had confused its own survival with the people's welfare. That is not a story unique to communism, it is the oldest story in politics. If this video made you think differently about the Indian left or about political power more generally, share it. Leave your thoughts below, and if you want a deeper dive into any specific episode, Nandigram, Operation Barga, Kerala's left model, let me know. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.